I appreciate you joining me, Dr. Madhura Swaminathan. A video of yours has gone viral at an event organized to honor your late father, who just got the Bharat Ratna last week. You have suggested that you are disappointed by reports that there are jails being prepared for farmers in Haryana, there are barricades, farmers are being tear gassed, and you've gone on to say in that video that's gone viral, these are farmers, annadata, these are not criminals. You want to expand on your feelings on how farmer protests are being dealt with by the centre?
Thank you, Rajdeep. Yesterday, the Indian Agricultural Research Institute, where the major part of my father's professional career was built, organized a memorial meeting for him. But it is, when I woke up in the morning, the news we got was a very different kind, as you mentioned, of the farmers who had started off from Punjab and were being blockaded. It's very distressing because I think food security, for our country's food and nutrition security, the farmers are the key. Farmers, cultivators, agricultural workers. We have to negotiate with them. We have to understand their problems. And without a strong agriculture, this is also something my father used to say, it's very difficult to build a sovereign nation and to have a standing on the world stage. So indeed, it is distressing to see that in a situation where we know for the last decade or more, there's some problems which have been there for even longer, but there's no doubt that there's agrarian distress of different kinds in large parts of the country. And we need to address these. We need to address the problems of farmers.
So you're saying you find it extremely distressing that protesting farmers are being tear gassed. But in one of your interventions yesterday, ma'am, you also said, if we have to continue to honor the memory of Dr. Swaminathan, we have to take the farmers with us in whatever strategy we are planning for the future. And you presumably are also distressed as a result by the fact that protesting farmers today are often called by some within government organizations as anti-national. You will recall what they were called in 2020. Some were labeled Khalistanis. I guess this demonization of farmers is something that should be troubling.
I agree with you in that the farmers are protesting for a reason. And I think for me, was somebody who has studied the rural economy and poverty and inequality, unionizing is not a bad word. If you win, there are some, we won, for example, in India, the right to food, the National Food Security Act, that came about through protests of different kinds by combination of actors. So I think attending to the problems of farmers, to their incomes, to higher profits, giving them higher profits while assuring sustainability, while addressing the problems, the new and emerging problems with climate change, is something that we have to address. They're a very important part of our population. And I think it is if I may put it this way, it is perhaps the absence of policies that have improved farmer incomes that have finally resulted in mass protests of this kind. We have to address the root causes of the problem of inadequate incomes of farmers.
You're raising an important point, inadequate incomes of farmers. What you're saying, therefore, is you need a dialogue with farmers. You don't need tear gas fired on them. They're not criminals. And you need to find ways in which you can have this dialogue with them. The government says they've been trying. The government says for the longest time we've been trying to work out some kind of an agreement, but farmers, especially from Punjab, are adamant. They've been unionized, and therefore there is a political element involved, and that is what is causing the standoff.
I think, Rajdeep, the problems of agriculture in India and of agriculturists, of farmers, as I said, is long-standing. And if you read the reports of the National Commission on Farmers, not just the last one, and with the formula which has now become very well known throughout the country, the formula paying MSP as C2 plus 50%, but there's an analysis of the problems of the problems of land and land distribution, of credit, of new technology, of irrigation, and all these problems of agriculture are in fact today exacerbated by climate change. So agriculture is not static. There are changes that are happening. And I think various Indian governments have not paid adequate attention to all these problems and have not addressed the problems of farmers. So this is something that has been building up, and this is also, I think, addressing these problems also requires action on multiple fronts. It's not a question of we couldn't negotiate and so on. We have to work out strategies that will, as the second report of the Farmers Commission was titled, we have to work out a strategy for serving farmers and saving farming.
You know, you're saying this. You spoke about the Swaminathan Committee report and the formula C2 plus 50%. That's the costs involved, input costs, other costs, plus 50% over that as a minimum support price. Now the government says, or government sources tell us, that's fiscally unsustainable. So do many economists. They believe that a legal guarantee for a minimum support price would result in food inflation and could result in a hit that the government exchequer could take up to 10 to 12,000 crore, 10 to 12 lakh crores per annum. How do you respond?
You know, I was a member of a committee chaired by the late Professor Abhijit Sen, the high-level committee on long-term grain policy, which was actually set up by Prime Minister Vajpayee. And that was the first time in our committee we proposed a statutory minimum support price. It's like a minimum wage. Unless there is some legal guarantee, how do you ensure that that wage is paid? So it was the first time that a statutory minimum support price was recommended in any committee or in any policy of India. The second point I want to make is that many economists argue that this is going to be too expensive, as they argued in the past about universal food subsidy. Now, the question we have to ask is too expensive for what? As you know, India's tax to GDP ratio is one of the lowest in the world. There are only a few countries which have a tax to GDP ratio lower than us. So I think to put forth a statement, as many neoliberal economists do, that you either spend in agricultural research, or you spend on irrigation, or you spend on minimum support price, because there is a limited kitty for agriculture and for farmers. I think that's a wrong way of posing the question. So I don't agree at all with this idea that it's not viable.
You know, let me end by asking you a slightly political question, ma'am. Dr. M.S. Swaminathan gets the Bharat Ratna last week, a well-deserved recognition for one of the architects of the Green Revolution. But there will be those who will say these recognitions mean very little. They're simply symbolic. The real challenge is, how do you make agriculture more sustainable, viable for millions of farmers in this country? That would be the way to pay a true tribute to Dr. Swaminathan. Do you agree that rather than giving someone a Bharat Ratna, what you really need is solutions that will make agriculture more viable and income sustainable in this country?
I don't know. He's not here, so I cannot answer for him. There are just two things I'd like to say. One is that earlier the Bharat Ratna was not posthumous. As you know, the Nobel Prizes are not posthumous. So recognizing an individual, I think, is very important in his or her lifetime. But I'd just like to end with, after the farmers' protests, the previous protests of 2020-21, the day that the three farm laws were repealed in Parliament, and I think it happened within a few minutes, he was so happy, and he put out a tweet on that day. He immediately, I was with him, and he said, please note this down. And he said, I'm very happy. And now, I forget the exact words, I'll send you the quote, but he said, now we have to sit down and think about how we address the issues of productivity, profitability, and sustainability.